I want to talk about Greg Koukl and the way that Greg Koukl appeals to moral intuitions when it suits him and then ignores moral intuitions when it does not suit him. So, a completely inconsistent and hypocritical position. And I want to begin by showing a couple clips from this video by Paul Enns, Paulogia. Paul is offering a different critique of Greg Koukl ultimately than I'm going to be focused on here, but I'm grateful to him for amassing these excellent clips that really capture Koukl appealing to moral intuitions. So, to the way things intuitively seem to us at face value, and trying to appeal to that as having determinative veridical value. So, we ought to defer to the way things seem to us, Greg Koukl alleges. And here's the first clip where he is debating about evolution and naturalism and appealing to intuitions.
This is why one of the reasons I think this is the evolutionary explanation is inadequate, okay? Because it seems that there are lots of things that people do that seem to be good for them or for their tribe that characteristically we'll look at and we'll assess it. And the assessment is that that is wrong, it's evil, it's wicked. And I think that our assessments are reliable in that regard, okay? That we have moral intuitions that allow us to see things that are real about that. And these things are relatively universal. I mean, it doesn't matter where you live or when you live, people are asking the question about the problem of evil in the world.
For Greg to imagine.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut Paul off. I'm going to link Paul's video below, and you can watch his critique of Greg Koukl, which I think there's also great value in looking at that. But I just want to offer my own critique here. So the thing to appreciate at this point is that Koukl has then appealed to moral intuitions to say, look, there are universal ways that things seem to us, and we ought to default to those ways of interpreting reality. Now we're just going to skip forward to the next clip.
This is actually a developed heuristic for their socialization and ability to empathize.
This is why this view, it fails the test of our moral intuitions. When we think about it, he's got to try to find some way to explain away the intuitions we have about that. I'm pretty confident that the explanation that I'm giving resonates with our deep intuitions about the nature of reality. It's
okay. So again, he's saying, look, you've got to appeal to moral intuitions, to our deep-seated intuitions. Your position has to line up with our moral intuitions and our universal moral intuitions about the nature of reality. So that's Greg Koukl talking about the role of moral intuitions and their veridical force. I'm not disagreeing with anything Koukl has said thus far, in the sense that I do believe, I agree, that we have deep-seated moral intuitions which provide very strong prima facie grounds to believe particular things about the world. For example, you look out at the world, you read about genocide unfolding in one part of the world, or children being killed in a military conflict targeted by soldiers, and you are repulsed by that, and you say that is evil, that is intrinsically wrong. And I think that you are warranted or justified in deferring to those very powerful intuitions that it is wrong to kill and target the innocent, to murder the innocent. And you also have very strong moral intuitions that certain other actions like love and compassion and mercy and goodness are right. And those moral intuitions may not be infallible, but then none of our deliverances of our epistemic cognitive faculties are infallible, but they are nonetheless very strong as anything. So, for example, anything I should say we believe. So, for example, if you were to tell me, God told me that I should kill your innocent baby that was just born, or something like that, I would say I have an overwhelming, what Alvin Plantinga would call a defeater for that, in my own intuitive sense that it is always wrong to kill innocent, harmless infants, and that God would never command such a thing. And based upon everything that Greg Koukl said thus far, in terms of deferring to our moral intuitions, one would assume that he would agree with that. Now we come to Greg Koukl talking about what he calls himself in this video I'm now going to look at genocide in ancient Canaan. He says initially describes it as genocide and then says it looks like genocide. So here you have in passages like Deuteronomy 7, Deuteronomy 20, 1 Samuel 15, Joshua 6, you have God commanding and the Israelites carrying out the mass targeting of a civilian population living in a land to kill everybody that lives in the land. And Koukl, he says he recognizes that this presents a strong moral problem. What are we going to do with this? He doesn't explicitly say this part, but I think it's pretty much in the background is that our moral intuitions are overwhelmingly against God ever commanding such a thing. Then he goes on and says, well, you could say that some of this is exaggeration, it's hyperbole. But of course, the hyperbole response, I think that Koukl recognizes it's not adequate. And I think it's a terrible response. Because, for example, if you go into a land and you indiscriminately kill men, women, children, and infants, and then the defense is, yeah, but I didn't kill all the men, women, children, and infants. I just indiscriminately killed a very large number of them. That's not a moral defense of your actions. The fact that you didn't actually kill everybody in the land. So I think Kokel's right to step back from that defense, which was popularized by Paul Copan. But then he gives his real defense for the genocidal slaughter of the Canaanites. And let's listen to him here.
I think that what God did is he judged a people.
Okay, sorry, got to slow him down there. Greg, you got to slow down so we can understand you better. Okay, so he says God judged a people
For unspeakable immorality. And he waited for a long time before he did that. He waited according to the account, because if the objection is against the account, we have to then take the account as it stands and let the account speak for itself. He waited 400 years. He told Abraham, the iniquity of the Amorites is not complete yet, so there's going to be 400 years before I come and bring as the instrument of the nation of Israel. Now, the question...
Okay, so apparently the moral intuitions that Greg has against slaughtering infants and children and women is now out the door. Before, when he was arguing with atheists or naturalists or humanists, he has this strong, unqualified appeal to moral intuitions. And he says, look, your views do not match our moral intuitions. But when it comes to a claim in an ancient Near Eastern document that, by the way, was written about 800 years after the events it describes, probably written around the time of the Josianic reforms, again, 800 years after the alleged invasion of Canaan. But when it comes there, he's going to accept the text at face value and toss our moral intuitions. And so he gives here a rationale. His rationale is, well, God waited 400 years to judge the Canaanites. Imagine that. Imagine if you went back to Rwanda in 1994 and you saw Hutus slaughtering Tutsis, men, women, children, infants in the streets. And if somebody were to say, yeah, but this acrimony has been going on for 400 years, and for 400 years, the Tutsis have been getting the better of the Hutus. And they had allegiances with the Belgians and the French that had oppressed the Hutus. And so for 400 years, Hutus have been patiently waiting. And so now, of course, it's morally justified for them to slaughter men, women, children, and infants in the streets. You would laugh at such moral reasoning. Well, you probably actually wouldn't laugh. You'd be utterly repulsed and disgusted by it, and you would toss it out the window. And yet, now when it comes to the ancient Israelite narrative, Greg Koukl just appeals to this and says, the sin of the Amorites has not reached its fullness. God waited 400 years. He was so patient before he began commanding the slaughter of men, women, children, and infants. And then he's going to go on and talk about how their sin was so great. So the idea being that, okay, actually, genocide isn't wrong intrinsically. Slaughtering men, women, children, and infants isn't intrinsically wrong. Our moral intuitions are just utterly unreliable on there. If an ancient Near Eastern text says that God's commanded the slaughter of civilian populations, you ought to believe that. In which case, it's pretty clear that Greg Koukl himself actually has no time for our moral intuitions. He is a complete hypocrite when he's debating a humanist, an atheist, a naturalist, whatever. He's going to argue for the universal binding force of moral intuitions. And then when it comes to reading the Bible, he's going to toss those same intuitions out the window.